So is Versace Eros Najim the best Versace Eros? I'm gonna try it out for the first time. So I bought Versace Eros Najim. I bought it at tax-free and I had a voucher, so I ended up paying somewhere around 70 bucks for 50 ml. So comparing the price, nowadays you can find 50 ml of Versace Eros Energy in gift boxes for around the same price as this. And the original Versace Eros EDT can often be found for around 50 to 60 bucks for 50 ml. So Versace Eros Najim is a bit more expensive, but not by a lot. So this is the bottle, and as you can see, it's pretty much identical to the other ones. So we have yellow mandarin, clary sage, cardamom and saffron at the top, oud accord, cedarwood and caramel at the heart of it, and Indonesian patchouli, Haitian vetiver, incense accord and tonka bean at the base. So I highly recommend to check out my Versace Eros Energy review. I'm gonna link to it above. I also recommend to check out my Versace Eros battle and my other different videos on different Versace fragrances. I think the line overall is fantastic. Versace Eros, the EDT, gets a lot of hate simply because it's so popular, but I think it's a great fragrance, and Versace Eros Energy is hated on a lot, but it's one of my current favorite freshers. Eros Najim, by the notes, look quite different, so this is definitely going to be interesting. Let's try it up in the air first. Okay, this is definitely a different kind of opening. Definitely a bit of freshness together with a bit of sort of a spicy warmth. But one thing that at least up in the air, and at least based on this first impression, cuts through in quite an intense way is a sort of a caramel-like kind of sweetness. So up in the air, a bit of freshness, but I don't consider this to be a super bright and super fresh kind of opening, and I'm getting a bit of spicy warmth up in the air as well together with a bit of caramel. So at least up in the air, this has a bit of that sort of Versace Eros DNA, but I don't find this to have the same kind of sort of freshness like Versace Eros Energy, and I don't find this to have the same sort of a freshness like the original Versace Eros and Flame. But let's try it on skin as well. Okay, on skin everything pops a lot more and in a much better way. So if you try Versace Eros Najim, I highly recommend to try it on skin. On skin, the spicy warmth of it is a lot richer and also quite a lot warmer. Yeah, definitely. On skin, the cardamom almost takes the lead here. So this is quite intensely spicy in the opening. And I also feel, and this is quite a big difference compared to when I tried it up in air, the clary sage cuts through much more intensely on skin. And I think it's the mandarin cutting through, giving it a bit of freshness. But here's the thing, the opening, a bit of freshness, definitely quite a lot of spicy warmth, and you have that clary sage giving it a bit of aromatic freshness. However, the overall feel of the opening is that this isn't super fresh. And if you compare this to the others in the line, I don't find this to have the same kind of freshness. And here's the thing, this has an interesting opening. I gotta give Versace that. This compared to a lot of other spicy and sort of a fresh, aromatic, fresh kind of openings, this actually has a bit of uniqueness to it. But I gotta say that even though I don't think the opening smells bad, at least based on this first impression, I think I prefer the opening of all the other Versace Eros fragrances over this. Maybe because it's so spicy intense, but there's something in the opening that, at least based on my first impression of it, sort of clashes. After about 5 minutes, Versace Eros Najim goes into something that I feel is mostly about caramel. The oud is definitely there. I do find the clary sage to still be quite present in the mids, and it's still quite intensely spicy. And to me, it almost feels like the caramel and oud are sort of equally prominent in the mids. So this has a sort of a sweet kind of caramel-ish kind of scent to it, together with what I feel is quite a mass appealing dose of oud. The oud in Eros Najim is definitely, at least based on my first impressions of it, not of the sort of dirty, funky, or too intense or too deep kind. I do like that they added clary sage to this, because I do think it adds a bit of sort of aromatic brightness and freshness to the whole thing. Without the clary sage here, this would not have been as enjoyable. So the mist to me, caramel and oud, the whole thing is a bit sweet, it's still quite intensely spicy, and you have a bit of a clary sage in the background, giving the whole thing a bit of freshness, a bit of aromatic freshness, even though I actually would have wished that part to have been a bit stronger. And I do think the mids is a lot better than the opening. The more Versace Eros Najim goes into the dry down, the more I feel everything about it is mostly about the caramel. So at least based on my first impressions of it, the caramel takes the lead in the dry down. The oud is definitely softer in the dry down. I'm still getting a bit of spiciness in the dry down. That part, however, has softened up quite a bit. I wish the clary sage would have lasted longer, but unfortunately that part is quite soft in the dry down. The dry down is also where I'm picking up on something vanilla-ish. It's not super intense, and it's definitely nowhere near as prominent and intense as in some of the other Versace Eros, but it's definitely there. So like caramel, soft oud, a bit of spicy warmth, you still have a soft hint of clary sage, and then you have a bit of vanilla. And it's gotta be the vanilla that gives me Versace Eros vibes. So this, in the dry down, actually smells a bit. You can actually pick up on some of that Versace Eros DNA in the dry down, and I do feel it's gotta be the tonka bean. And the whole thing is a bit sweet. Now, in the dry down, Versace Eros Najim could almost be described as such as if you would take just a bit of the cardamom and the caramel from Azzaro the Most Wanted Eau de Parfum. This is definitely more caramel-ish and more sweet than Eros Najim though. And then blended that with a bit of the original Versace Eros, but without the sort of a freshness and the green aspects of Versace Eros. So sort of like a mix of these two, but with a twist. And one thing about the dry down is that I'm getting soft vibes of Armani Stronger With You oud, but without the lavender. Even though the opening was my least likable part of it, I do think the opening has the most uniqueness to it. The mids is where I think it started to get a lot better and a lot more enjoyable. I do find the dry down, however, to be my most favorite part of it. But here's the thing, even though my most favorite part of it is the dry down, I also feel the dry down is, in a way, the least unique part of it. The dry down is definitely the part where I feel Versace Eros Najim start to smell a bit more like other fragrances out there. The vibe of Versace Eros Najim is definitely a bit like the others in that this is definitely something that is sort of flirty and sexy. However, I do feel this goes in a slightly more mature way. The overall feel of it is definitely something that is quite sexy. However, I do find this to be a bit more mature than some of the other ones. And I also feel the intense spiciness and the mix with its woody side, that soft oud, gives this slightly sort of a mysterious kind of vibe. So here are my initial thoughts on compliments and mass appeal. I do think that the opening is the least mass appealing and least likable part of Versace Eros Najim. The mids is a bit better, but the dry down of Versace Eros Najim is definitely something that is a bit more mass appealing. This is definitely quite a likable scent in the dry down. It is, however, most definitely not as mass appealing as the other Versace Eros. But with that said, this is another Versace Eros, and the whole line is quite a mass appealing one. So when it comes to performance, I really gotta wear it more. But based on what I'm picking up right now, I do feel that this is somewhere above average. I definitely don't feel this is a weak fragrance, but I do think the others in the line are stronger than this. When I spray on the other Versace Eros, I can clearly pick up on them in quite an intense way. Versace Eros Najim is definitely a scent I can pick up on. This thing definitely oozes from my skin in quite a noticeable way. but I don't find this to be as intense as the other ones. But I'm gonna update you in a future video if I feel that this changes in any way. So here are my initial thoughts on usage. So like seasons and occasions, this Versace Eros Najim does have a bit of freshness to it, but I don't consider this to be a fresh scent. I feel the fresh green and aromatic aspects of the other ones make them a bit more versatile. So whereas I do feel the other Versace Eros can be used throughout the year, with Versace Eros Energy being clearly a summer fragrance, this to me falls into something that I feel works better for fall, winter, spring and summer nights. As for occasions, definitely date nights when you're going out, or special occasions. If you spray this on, Eros Najim, when you're going out, I do recommend to spray a bit extra. And like I said earlier, the dry down is definitely the most mass appealing and likable part of Versace Eros Najim, so I do recommend waiting at least 5 minutes after spraying it on if you're going out. So who's Versace Eros Najim for? I think number one, you gotta know that you enjoy quite intensely spicy fragrances, because this is quite intensely, at least in the opening through to the mids, and that spiciness lasts quite a while. Number two, you gotta know that you enjoy caramel and caramel-ish kind of sweetness in fragrances, because this definitely has quite a prominent dose of caramel. Number three, it's a good thing if you know that you enjoy a bit of oud, even though I do think the oud in here is quite soft, and I also feel the oud in here is of the mass appealing kind. There's still a bit of oud in here. If you don't like any of that, then stay away. And like I said earlier in this video, Versace Eros Najim is almost like if you would take a bit of Azzaro the Most Wanted, the Eau de Parfum, but sort of make it a bit less sort of intense, and mix it with a bit of Versace Eros, the EDT, but remove some of the green, aromatic and citrusy aspects of it. Sort of like that, but with a twist. But with that said, I don't think Versace Eros Najim is as epic as Azzaro the Most Wanted, so don't expect Eros Najim to be this good. And don't expect Versace Eros Najim to be on the same sort of level of green, aromatic and citrusy freshness as the OG. It does have a bit of vanilla in it, however that part is a lot softer in Eros Najim and a lot more prominent in Eros, and that vanilla is really the backbone of the Versace Eros, the original and the Parfum and the Eau de Parfum and Flame, sort of the backbone of those, and one of the reasons why those are so good. And I'm 100% sure Versace Eros Najim would have been a lot better if it would have had a stronger dose of vanilla. So what are some of the alternatives to Versace Eros Najim? So the first alternative I want to talk about is Scandal Pour Homme from Jean Paul Gaultier. This is also about caramel and vanilla. However, I do feel the caramel in Scandal is a lot more intense. I also feel it's a lot more sweet, and I also feel the vanilla in Scandal Pour Homme Intense is a lot more prominent than the one in Eros Najim. But Scandal Pour Homme is not just about sweet caramel and vanilla. This has a fantastic dose of clary sage to it, which brings a fantastic contrast to the sweet vanilla and caramel. Scandal Pour Homme is a fantastic sweet scent with a focus on caramel and vanilla with that touch of clary sage, and this is a great complement getter. Another alternative is Azzaro the Most Wanted, the Eau de Parfum. This also has quite a prominent dose of cardamom and a prominent dose of caramel, and that made me think of it when I smell this. However, I do find these to be quite different. So even though this sort of reminds me of Azzaro the Most Wanted Parfum, I think everything about the Most Wanted Eau de Parfum shines and pops more. So the cardamom is very, very intense and a bit different if I compare it to the one in Eros Najim. The caramel has a lot more depth and warmth and sweetness to it if I compare it to the caramel in Eros Najim. Azzaro the Most Wanted Eau de Parfum is also a bit woody, however I do find it to be a bit different if I compare it to Eros Najim. This is an absolute banger though, and I highly recommend it. You obviously have the other ones in the line, and for that I do recommend to check out my other videos with them in. So what are my final thoughts on Versace Eros Najim based on my first impressions of it? The opening is definitely the most unique part of Versace Eros Najim. It starts to get a bit less unique the more it dries down, so the mids to me is actually smells better than the opening, even though it's less unique, and the dry down smells even better than the opening and the mids. But again, I do find the dry down to be the less sort of a unique part of it. I do enjoy caramel in fragrances, so the dry down to me is actually quite a nice one. I was definitely not a big fan of the opening, but the dry down is actually quite nice. A bit of tonka bean in the dry down gives this a bit of that sort of a Versace Eros DNA. However, I do wish that part in Versace Eros Najim would have been more intense and more prominent, because I do feel this would probably have been a lot better with a more intense dose of tonka bean. And I also feel that the caramel in Versace Eros Najim lacks a bit of sort of a pop and depth. So if I compare the caramel in Eros Najim to fragrances like Scandal Pour Homme or The Most Wanted or Parfum, the caramel in both of those pop a lot more and in a better way. So in a way, I do feel that part in Eros Najim could have had a bit more depth to it. The caramel is definitely prominent, but I just feel it lacks something. So with the exception of the opening, Eros Najim smells good. I don't think this is something that blows me away though. I do not feel this is a stellar or fantastic or epic kind of scent, but it smells good. And I would definitely, without a single doubt, choose any of the other Versace Eros over Eros Najim. So good, but not great. Make sure you check out my other Versace videos over there. Now, I would absolutely love to know how you feel about Versace Eros Najim. Do you feel this is an absolute banger? Do you feel this is mid, or do you think it's a bad one? Like and subscribe for more. Thank you. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.